The morning began with a desperate decision, hiding her own daughter at work to avoid being fired. But when she took the little girl up to the executive floor, the maid never imagined she would meet again the man who would change everything. A simple children's song was enough to expose a buried past and reveal a connection impossible to ignore. What was meant to be just another day of struggle turned into a reunion of pain, forgiveness, and destiny. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The rain came down hard that Tuesday morning in Chicago, turning the sidewalks into rivers and the sky into a sheet of gray steel. Sarah Mitchell stood at the kitchen window of her tiny Southside apartment, watching the drops race down the glass, her mind already calculating how many buses she'd need to catch to make it to her first shift on time. 3 jobs, 3 different uniforms hanging in her closet. 3 different versions of herself she had to become every single day, just to keep the lights on and food on the table. Behind her, 4-year-old Emma sat at the small kitchen table, pushing cereal around in her bowl with a spoon, her big brown eyes fixed on her mother's back. The little girl hadn't said much that morning, which wasn't unusual. Emma had always been sensitive, the kind of child who felt everything too deeply, who hid behind her mother's legs when strangers spoke too loudly, who cried at the sound of sirens in the night. Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who watched Emma during Sarah's shifts, her name flashing on the screen. Sarah's stomach dropped even before she answered. She already knew what was coming. "Sarah, honey, I'm so sorry." Mrs. Chen's voice crackled through the speaker, weak and apologetic. "My daughter just called. She's taking me to the doctor this morning. Something with my heart. I can't watch Emma today." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the chest. She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles went white. "It's okay, Mrs. Chen. Please take care of yourself. I'll figure something out." But there was nothing to figure out. No backup plan. No other neighbors available on a Tuesday morning. No daycare that would take a child for just a few hours without weeks of paperwork and deposits she couldn't afford. And definitely no calling in sick to her job at TechCore Industries. Not when she'd already missed a day last month, when Emma had a fever. Sarah turned to look at her daughter, this small person who depended on her for everything, who looked at her like she hung the moon every single night. Emma's dark curls were still messy from sleep, and she wore her favorite pajamas, the ones with the faded stars that were 2 sizes too small, but that she refused to give up. "Mama." Emma's voice was small, uncertain. She could sense her mother's worry, like animals sense storms coming. Sarah made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. She knelt down in front of Emma, brushing those wild curls away from her face. "Baby, how would you like to come to work with Mama today? Just for a little while?" Emma's eyes went wide with fear. "I don't like new places." "I know, sweetheart, but Mama will be right there the whole time. I promise I won't leave you alone." The TechCore building rose 40 stories into the Chicago skyline, all glass and steel and ambition. Sarah had been cleaning its offices for 8 months, arriving before dawn to empty trash cans and scrub toilets, while the executives were still asleep in their suburban homes. She knew every floor, every corner, every stain that wouldn't come out of the carpet no matter how hard she scrubbed. But she'd never brought Emma there. They entered through the service entrance, Emma's small hand gripping Sarah's with desperate strength. The lobby stretched out before them, like a cathedral of modern success. All marble floors and chrome fixtures that reflected their images back at them, distorted and small. Sarah's simple grey uniform seemed to absorb light, while the business suits around them shimmered and gleamed. Her supervisor, Margaret, a stern woman in her 50s with reading glasses that hung on a chain around her neck, spotted them immediately. Her mouth formed a thin line of disapproval. "Sarah." A word. Sarah's heart hammered as she approached, Emma plastered to her side like a shadow. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm so sorry. My regular sitter had an emergency and I had no one else. I'll keep her with me the whole time. She won't be any trouble, I promise." Margaret looked down at Emma, who had buried her face in her mother's leg, and something in the older woman's expression softened just slightly. She had grandchildren of her own, Sarah knew. She'd seen the photos on Margaret's desk. "She stays in the supply closet on the 2nd floor, Margaret said finally, her voice still stern but not unkind. "You keep her there. She doesn't wander. And she absolutely does not go to the executive floors. Are we clear?" Yes, ma'am. Crystal clear. Thank you. The supply closet on the second floor smelled like bleach and lemon polish. Sarah set up a small space for Emma with her jacket as a cushion on the floor, gave her a coloring book and some crayons she'd brought in her bag, and her daughter's worn teddy bear that went everywhere with them. Mama has to work now, baby, but I'll come check on you every few minutes, okay? You just color and play with Mr. Bear and we'll be home before you know it. Emma nodded, but her bottom lip trembled. Don't go far. Never, baby, never far. Sarah spent the morning in a constant state of anxiety, rushing through her tasks so she could keep checking on Emma. Each time she opened the closet door, her daughter looked up with those big eyes, so full of trust and fear mixed together. It broke Sarah's heart in ways she couldn't even name. Just before noon, everything changed. Sarah's radio crackled with Margaret's voice, urgent and annoyed. "Mitchell, get up to 40. Executive conference room. Someone spilled coffee all over the table and they have a meeting starting in 10 minutes. Now." The 40th floor, the executive floor. The one place Emma was absolutely not supposed to be. Sarah stared at the closet door, her mind racing through impossible options. She couldn't leave Emma alone, not on a different floor, not where her daughter couldn't find her if she got scared. And she couldn't ignore a direct order from the 40th floor, not if she wanted to keep this job. She made her choice in seconds. "Emma, baby, you need to come with Mama just for a minute. Can you be very, very quiet?" The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending into another dimension. The carpet was thicker here, the air seemed cleaner, and everything was hushed in a way that felt almost sacred. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly as they stepped out into the corridor, lined with modern art and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Michigan. The conference room door was open. Sarah could see the dark stain spreading across the polished wood table. She positioned Emma in a chair in the corner, far from the mess, and whispered, "Stay right here. Don't move. Mama will be done in just a second." She knelt down with her cleaning supplies, working as fast as she could, trying to make herself invisible the way she'd learned to do in this building. She was so focused on the stain that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching until it was too late. "How much longer is this going to take?" The voice was cold, clipped, and unmistakably annoyed. Sarah looked up to find herself staring at polished black shoes, expensive suit pants, and then, as her gaze traveled upward, the face of James Harrison himself, the CEO of TechCore Industries, the man whose picture hung in the lobby, whose name was on half the patents that made this company billions. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with dark hair starting to grey at the temples and eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. There was something hollow in those eyes, something that reminded Sarah of abandoned buildings she'd passed in her neighborhood, windows dark and no life inside. "I'm almost done, sir," Sarah stammered, scrubbing harder at the stain. "Just another minute." That's when Emma started to cry. It began as a whimper, the sound of a child who had been trying so hard to be brave but couldn't hold it together anymore. Then it grew into something bigger, a sob that came from deep in her small chest. She didn't like this strange place, didn't like this tall man with the cold voice, didn't like being away from the safety of her mother's arms. "Mama," Emma cried out, reaching for Sarah with both hands, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, I want to go home." Sarah dropped her cleaning cloth and rushed to her daughter, but Emma was already in full panic mode, the kind that happened sometimes in new places with new people, where logic and comfort didn't matter, and only fear remained. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said to James Harrison, trying to soothe Emma while simultaneously apologizing to the most powerful man in the building. "She's scared. She doesn't do well with strangers. I'm sorry, sir, I'll just take her and go." But something strange happened. Instead of growing more annoyed, instead of calling security or demanding that Sarah be fired on the spot, James Harrison stood very still, staring at the crying child with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. It was like watching someone wake up from a very long sleep, confused and disoriented. "Let me try," he said quietly. Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Let me try to calm her down." He said it like he was surprised by his own words, like they'd come out of his mouth without his permission. "Sir, she really doesn't like strangers. She'll just get more upset." But James was already moving closer, slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a frightened animal. He knelt down so he was at Emma's level, his expensive suit touching the carpet without hesitation. "Hey there," he said softly, and his voice had changed completely. The coldness was gone, replaced by something gentle and aching. "It's okay. You're safe." Sarah wanted to protest, wanted to explain that this wouldn't work, that Emma would just scream louder. But before she could say anything, James held out his arms to the little girl. And Emma, this child who hid from grocery store clerks and cried at birthday parties with too many people, this sensitive soul who trusted almost no one, looked at James Harrison with her tear-stained face and did something impossible. She reached for him. Sarah watched in shock as her daughter went willingly into the arms of this complete stranger, wrapping her small arms around his neck and pressing her wet face against his shoulder. The crying stopped almost immediately, replaced by soft hiccups and shuddering breaths. James closed his eyes, holding Emma like she was made of glass and gold, something precious and fragile. His hands shook slightly as he supported her small body. And then Emma did something even stranger. She began to sing. It was the lullaby Sarah had made up years ago, back when she worked as a pediatric nurse, back before everything fell apart. A variation on an old children's song, with lyrics she'd changed to talk about angels watching over children in the night, protecting them from bad dreams and keeping them safe until morning. Emma's small voice filled the conference room, sweet and clear despite her tears. "Angel watching from above, keeping me safe with all your love. When the night is dark and long, angel sings a gentle song." James Harrison went completely still. The color drained from his face like someone had opened a tap and let it all pour out. He stood frozen, holding Emma, his eyes wide and fixed on nothing, seeing something that wasn't in the room with them. A phone slipped from his jacket pocket and clattered to the floor. He didn't seem to notice. "Where," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "where did she learn that song?" Sarah stepped forward, worried now, reaching for Emma. "I made it up years ago. When I was a nurse at Children's Memorial, I used it to help sick kids fall asleep. Sir, are you okay?" But James wasn't okay. He carefully, almost reverently, passed Emma back to her mother. But his hands were shaking badly now, and his breathing had gone shallow. "What's your name?" he asked Sarah. "Sarah Mitchell, sir." "And you worked at Children's Memorial as a nurse?" "Yes, sir, in the pediatric oncology unit. But that was years ago. I don't work there anymore." Something clicked behind James Harrison's eyes, some connection being made that Sarah couldn't see. He took a step back, running his hand through his hair, looking lost in a way that seemed completely at odds with his powerful position. "My office," he said finally. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Bring your daughter." "Sir, That's not a request, Miss Mitchell. 9 a.m., don't be late." He walked out of the conference room without another word, leaving his phone on the floor, leaving the meeting he was supposed to attend, leaving Sarah standing there with her crying daughter and 1,000 questions she didn't know how to ask. That night, after getting Emma to bed in their tiny apartment, after reassuring her again and again that everything was fine, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she was too anxious to drink and tried to understand what had happened. She was certain she was going to be fired. Men like James Harrison didn't ask cleaning ladies to bring their children to their offices for any good reason. She'd broken the rules, brought Emma to the executive floor, interrupted his day. She should start looking for a new job tonight, but something about the way he'd looked at Emma, the way he'd held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, the way his face had shattered when Emma sang that song, it didn't feel like anger. It felt like grief. Deep, old grief that had been buried for so long it had fossilized into something hard and cold, until a 4-year-old girl with a sweet voice had cracked it open again. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Emma's soft breathing from the small bed across the room, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know it yet, but that Tuesday morning in the rain had changed everything. The life she'd been living, the careful balance she'd maintained for years, the walls she'd built to protect herself and her daughter, all of it was about to come crashing down. Sometimes the universe puts the same people in your path twice, once to plant a seed, and once to watch it grow into something neither of them could have imagined. James Harrison sat alone in his office on the 40th floor, long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights of Chicago twinkled below him like fallen stars, but he saw none of it. His hands trembled as he opened the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk, the one he hadn't touched in 3 years, the one with the small brass lock that he'd convinced himself he'd lost the key to, even though it hung on his keychain every single day. Inside was a leather box, worn at the edges, filled with things he'd sworn he'd never look at again. photos, cards, a tiny pink shoe, a hospital bracelet, and there at the bottom a spiral notebook with his late wife Catherine's handwriting covering the pages, her journal from those final months. The months when their daughter Lily had been sick. The months that had destroyed everything he thought he knew about life and hope and fairness. His fingers shook as he turned the pages, scanning through entries he'd memorized against his will. Doctor's appointments, medication schedules, small victories and crushing setbacks, and then he found it. The entry from October 15th, 3 years and 2 months ago. Today was hard, Catherine had written in her careful script. Lily couldn't sleep again. The nightmares are getting worse. The nurses tried everything, but she just kept crying. Then one of the nurses, Sarah, I think her name was, came in during her break. She had the kindest eyes. She picked up Lily and started singing this beautiful lullaby I'd never heard before. Something about angels watching over children. Lily fell asleep in her arms for the first time in days. I took a photo of them, but Sarah was turned away from the camera, holding our baby girl so gently. I wrote on the back, "The nurse who sings, our angel." James wasn't there. He's never there anymore. He can't handle seeing her like this. But this nurse, this Sarah, she wasn't afraid. She just loved our daughter like she was her own. James closed the notebook and pulled out the stack of photos with hands that could barely hold them steady. He went through them one by one. Lily in her hospital bed, pale and small. Lily with Catherine, both of them trying to smile. Lily with tubes and wires that had haunted his dreams for years. And then he found it, the photo Catherine had described. A young woman in scrubs, her brown hair pulled back holding a small child against her shoulder. The woman's face wasn't visible, turned away from the camera, but Lily's face was peaceful, finally peaceful, her eyes closed and her small hand clutching the nurse's uniform. On the back in Catherine's handwriting, "The nurse who sings, our angel, October 15th. Thank you, Sarah." James set the photo down on his desk and pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to stop the tears that came anyway. For 3 years he'd been a ghost. He'd thrown himself into work because work didn't hurt, didn't remember, didn't feel. He'd fired anyone who expressed sympathy. He'd sold the house where Lily had played in the backyard. He'd donated all her toys, all her clothes, everything except this box he couldn't quite bring himself to open. And then today, a little girl with brown eyes had looked at him and sung the same song, word for word, note for note, the same lullaby that had comforted his daughter in her final weeks. The same woman who had held Lily was now cleaning his floors. He didn't believe in signs. He didn't believe in fate or destiny or divine intervention. He believed in science and statistics and cold, hard reality. But this was impossible to ignore. The universe had put Sarah Mitchell in his path twice, once when he was too broken to notice, and now when he was still broken but maybe, just maybe, ready to try being human again. James picked up his phone and made a call to HR, then another to his head of security. He needed to know everything about Sarah Mitchell, not because he didn't trust her, but because he needed to understand how someone who had saved his daughter from nightmares had ended up scrubbing toilets in his building. The next morning, Sarah stood outside James Harrison's office at exactly 9 a.m., holding Emma's hand so tightly she worried she might hurt her. She'd dressed Emma in the nicest outfit they owned, a little blue dress that used to be for special occasions, but had faded from too many washes. Sarah herself wore her cleanest pair of jeans and a simple blouse, the closest thing she had to professional attire that wasn't a cleaning uniform. Margaret had given her a strange look when she'd called in that morning, saying she had a meeting with the CEO. "Don't take any charity from these people," Margaret had warned her. "They'll make you feel like you owe them forever." The office door opened and James Harrison stood there, but he looked different from yesterday. The coldness was gone from his eyes, replaced by something raw and painful and almost human. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, just dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. There were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept. "Miss Mitchell, please come in." The office was enormous, with windows on 2 sides and furniture that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. But what caught her attention was the photo sitting on his desk, turned toward them. A photo of a little girl with blonde curls and a bright smile, maybe 5 years old, wearing a princess costume. "That's Lily," James said quietly, following her gaze. "My daughter. She passed away 3 years ago, Pediatric leukemia. She was 6. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. I'm so sorry. You took care of her, James continued, his voice thick. At Children's Memorial, October and November 3 years ago, you sang to her when she couldn't sleep. You held her when my wife and I couldn't bear to watch her suffer anymore. The memories came flooding back. Sarah remembered now, a little blonde girl with the saddest eyes, who'd been terrified of the dark, who'd cried for her daddy who never seemed to be there. Sarah had been working double shifts back then, trying to save money, trying to be the kind of nurse who made a difference. And she'd held that little girl dozens of times, sang to her, stayed past the end of her shifts because Lily would cry when she tried to leave. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. Lily, I remember her. She was so sweet, so brave. She died 2 weeks after that photo was taken, James said, and now the tears were visible on his face and he didn't try to hide them. My wife Catherine died 6 months later. Cancer. She'd been sick before Lily got diagnosed, but she hid it from everyone so she could focus on our daughter. By the time Lily passed, Catherine was stage 4. I lost both of them within half a year. Sarah felt her own tears falling. Emma pressed closer to her mother, confused by all the sadness in the room. I'm so sorry, Sarah said again. I didn't realize. I left the hospital not long after that. I couldn't do it anymore. Watching children suffer, losing them. I loved that job, but it was destroying me. I quit and I thought I could find something else in nursing, but I just couldn't go back to any hospital, so I ended up here. James nodded, wiping his face with his hand. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. That song Emma sang yesterday, is it the same one you sang to Lily? Yes, Sarah said. I made it up for patients who had nightmares. I don't sing it often anymore, but Emma loves it. I had no idea Lily was your daughter. I swear. I didn't know you worked here when I took this job. I know, James said. I believe you. Sarah, I haven't felt anything in 3 years. I've been walking around like a dead man, going through motions, building a company because it was the only thing that didn't hurt. And then yesterday, your daughter reached for me. A child who doesn't trust strangers reached for me. And she sang the same song that gave my daughter peace. I held Emma, and for the first time since I lost Lily, I felt something other than pain. I felt like maybe I could still be human. He walked to the window, looking out over the city, his shoulders tense. I want to offer you a job, a real job, as my executive assistant. The salary is $80,000 a year with full benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, flexible hours. And there's a small office next to mine that we can convert into a space for Emma, a place where she can play, do activities, be safe while you work. I'm not trying to replace my daughter. I'm not trying to buy your gratitude. I need to do something good. Something that isn't about profit margins and quarterly earnings. And maybe having you and Emma around will help me remember how to be a person again. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. $80,000, health insurance. She could move to a better neighborhood. Emma could go to a good school. They could eat something other than pasta and rice every night. But Margaret's warning echoed in her mind. Don't take charity. They'll make you feel like you owe them forever. Why? Sarah asked. Why would you do this for us? Because 3 years ago, when I was too much of a coward to sit in my daughter's hospital room, you held her. You sang to her. You gave her comfort when her own father couldn't bear to look at her dying. You did that without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return. You did it because you're a good person, and because I need to believe that good people deserve good things, or everything I've built means nothing. If you were in Sarah's place, would you have accepted the offer, or would you have done something else? Tell us in the comments. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was playing with a paperweight on James's desk, completely oblivious to the weight of this moment. This little girl deserved so much more than Sarah could give her on a cleaning salary. She deserved stability and security, and a childhood that wasn't defined by poverty and fear. But she also deserved a mother who kept her dignity, who didn't become someone's project or charity case. I'll take the job, Sarah said finally, but I need you to promise me something. This has to be a real job. You pay me because I work, not because you feel guilty or grateful. And Emma stays with me because I'm a good employee, not because you're trying to fill a hole in your heart. Can you promise me that? James turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something like respect in his eyes. I promise. You'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life. I'm not an easy boss. But you'll be treated fairly and paid well. Deal?" "Deal." They shook hands, and Sarah felt like she was stepping off a cliff into empty air, not knowing if she'd fall or fly. James crouched down to Emma's level, and this time Sarah didn't stop him. "What's your name?" he asked the little girl gently. "Emma," she whispered, still shy but not as terrified as before. "Emma, your mum is going to be working here now, and I was thinking that office over there, we could put some toys in it. Maybe some books. Would you like that?" Emma nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by reaching out and touching James's face with her small hand, the same way she'd done yesterday. "You're sad," she said simply, "like Mama sometimes." James closed his eyes, and Sarah saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "Yeah, kiddo, I am sad sometimes, but maybe having you around will help with that. I can share my crayons," Emma offered seriously. "Mama says sharing makes people happy." James laughed, and it sounded rusty, like a machine that hadn't been used in years trying to start up again. "That's a pretty good deal. I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, Sarah's life transformed in ways she'd never imagined. She moved from the supply closet to an office with windows, from a grey uniform to professional clothes that James had somehow arranged to be delivered to her apartment. Emma's little room next to James's office became a paradise of toys and books and art supplies. And slowly, so slowly, the terrified little girl who hid from strangers began to bloom, and James Harrison, the man who'd forgotten how to smile, started to remember what it felt like to be alive. 3 months passed like a dream Sarah kept expecting to wake up from. She moved through her days in a state of cautious wonder, still half convinced that someone would tap her on the shoulder and tell her there'd been a mistake, that she needed to go back to scrubbing floors where she belonged. But the mistake never came. Instead, she learned how to manage James Harrison's calendar, coordinate meetings with executives from 3 continents, and navigate the complex politics of a tech company worth billions. Emma thrived in her little room next to James's office. The terrified child who used to hide behind her mother's legs now greeted the executives who passed by with shy waves and crayon drawings. She had a schedule now, activities throughout the day, educational games on a tablet James had given her, and books that Sarah read to her during lunch breaks. But the most remarkable change was in how Emma looked at James himself. She'd started calling him Mr. James and then just James, and now sometimes, when she forgot herself, she called him something that made Sarah's heart stop every time. Daddy James. Sarah watched it happen with a mixture of joy and terror. She saw how James's face lit up when Emma ran to him at the end of the day, how he'd started keeping granola bars and juice boxes in his desk drawer, how he'd learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos late at night so he could help Emma when Sarah was busy with a conference call. She saw a man coming back to life, piece by painful piece, and she didn't know if she should encourage it or protect him from the inevitable hurt when this arrangement, whatever it was, eventually ended. Because it would end. Things like this always ended. Men like James Harrison didn't stay interested in cleaning ladies who'd gotten lucky. The novelty would wear off. He'd remember who he was and who she was, and the distance between them would reassert itself like gravity, pulling everything back to its proper place. At least, that's what Sarah told herself on the nights when she lay awake in her apartment, which was still in the same building, still small, still in a neighborhood where sirens sang every night. She'd refused James's offer to help her find a better place. That felt too much like charity, too much like dependence. She was saving her salary, building a cushion, planning for the day when this fairy tale ended and she had to stand on her own again. But then there were moments that made her doubt her cynicism, like the Saturday when James called and asked, his voice uncertain, if maybe Sarah and Emma would want to join him at Lincoln Park. "I haven't been there since before Lily got sick," he'd admitted. "I thought maybe it would be easier with you two there, if that's not weird." "I know it's probably weird. You can say no." Sarah had said yes before she could stop herself. They met at the entrance, and Sarah barely recognized the man walking toward them. James Harrison without a suit was a revelation. He wore jeans that actually looked worn in, a simple navy blue sweater, and sneakers. His hair wasn't perfectly styled, but slightly messy from the wind off the lake. He looked younger, softer, almost vulnerable. Emma squealed and ran to him, and James caught her, swinging her up into his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Ready to feed some ducks, kiddo?" They spent hours in that park, the three of them moving through the autumn afternoon like a family that had always existed. They fed ducks stale bread that James had remembered to bring. They rode the carousel, Emma sandwiched between the two adults, her laughter ringing out pure and clear. They bought hot dogs from a vendor and ate them sitting on a bench, watching people pass by, and talked about things that had nothing to do with work or schedules or professional boundaries. James told her about his daughter, really told her, not the sanitized version he'd shared in his office. He talked about how Lily had loved butterflies, how she'd made him read the same bedtime story 14 nights in a row, how she'd insisted on wearing her princess costume to the grocery store every single week. He talked about Catherine, his wife, how she'd been an artist, how she'd seen beauty in everything, how she'd loved so fiercely that it had burned her up from the inside when she couldn't save their daughter. "I wasn't there," James said, staring at his hands. "When Lily died, I mean. I was at the office in a meeting I'd convinced myself was crucial. Catherine called me 6 times. I saw the calls, I knew what they meant, and I couldn't make myself answer, I couldn't face it. By the time I got to the hospital, Lily had been gone for 20 minutes. Catherine held her alone. She died alone with our daughter because I was too much of a coward to be there." Sarah reached over and took his hand without thinking. "You were there for all the days before." That's what she remembered. Kids don't remember every single moment. They remember the feeling of being loved, and Lily knew she was loved. "Did she?" James's voice cracked. "Because some nights I wonder if she died thinking her daddy abandoned her." "She didn't," Sarah said firmly. "I saw how she talked about you. Even when you weren't there, you were there in her stories. She'd tell me about her daddy who could fix anything, who made the best pancakes, who did funny voices when he read to her. That's what she remembered. Not the end, the love." Emma, who'd been quietly playing with a stick nearby, came over and climbed into James's lap. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. And James, this powerful man who ran a company worth billions, broke down crying in a public park, holding a little girl who wasn't his daughter, but who'd somehow found the broken parts of him that needed healing. Sarah cried too, and she didn't try to hide it. When they finally left the park, the sun setting in shades of orange and pink over the Chicago skyline, something had shifted between them. The boundaries were still there, the professional distance, the awareness of their different worlds, but underneath it all was something else. Something fragile and terrifying and maybe, just maybe, real. James walked them to Sarah's bus stop, and for a moment they just stood there. Emma half asleep on Sarah's shoulder, the city moving around them. "Thank you," James said quietly. "For today, for everything. You're giving me my life back, and I don't know how to repay that." "You gave me mine first," Sarah replied. "Fair trade." He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time, making him look almost boyish. "Same time next week?" "Yeah," Sarah said, and felt herself smiling back. Same time next week. The weeks turned into months, and the Saturday park visits became a routine they all looked forward to. But there were weekday moments too, late afternoons when James would finish early, and the three of them would grab dinner at a small diner near Sarah's neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just burgers and fries and conversation that flowed easy as water. Evenings when James would drive them home, and Sarah would invite him up for coffee, and Emma would fall asleep on the couch while the two adults talked about everything and nothing. The people at work started to notice. Sarah could feel the looks, hear the whispers that stopped when she entered a room, the gossip about the cleaning lady who'd somehow become the CEO's right hand. Some people were kind about it. Margaret gave her a knowing look and said, "I told you not to take their charity, but maybe some charity is worth taking." Others weren't so kind. There were rumors, ugly ones, about what Sarah must be doing to maintain her position. James shut down the gossip when he heard it, coldly and efficiently, but Sarah knew it bothered him more than he let on. "They don't understand," he told her one night. "They think everything is transactional. They can't imagine that maybe I'm just trying to do something right for once in my life." "It's okay," Sarah said. "People always talk. It doesn't matter." But it did matter, at least a little, because Sarah was starting to feel something she'd promised herself she wouldn't feel. She was falling in love with James Harrison, and it terrified her more than poverty ever had. She saw it in the way her heart jumped when he smiled at her, in the way she found herself dressing more carefully on days when she knew they'd have meetings together, in the way she'd started imagining a future that wasn't just about survival, but about something bigger. Something that included this man who'd somehow become essential to her daily life. And she thought maybe he felt it too. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite name. Felt the way his hand lingered when he passed her papers. Noticed how he always found excuses to extend their conversations, to keep her in his office a few more minutes, to text her on weekends about nothing important. It was Emma who forced the issue, the way children often do when adults are too scared to be honest. They were at James's house for the first time, a massive place in Lincoln Park that he'd bought after selling the house where Lily had lived. It was beautiful but empty, decorated by professionals with no personal touches anywhere, no photos or memories or signs that anyone actually lived there. Emma had been exploring with the wonder of a child seeing a mansion for the first time. "You have so many rooms," she'd exclaimed. "Why do you live here all by yourself?" James had looked uncomfortable. "I guess I never really thought about it." "That's silly," Emma had announced with the brutal honesty of a 4-year-old. "Nobody should live alone in a big house. You should live with people you love, like Mama and me. We love you." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face burned. James stood frozen, a glass of water halfway to his lips, looking at Emma like she'd just solved an equation he'd been struggling with for years. "Emma," Sarah started, "that's not—" "Do you love us?" Emma interrupted, looking at James with those big, serious eyes. "Because Mama smiles different when she talks about you, and you smile different when you look at her. That's what love looks like. That's what the princesses in my movies say." James set down his glass carefully. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and she saw everything in that look. The fear, the hope, the desperate want of someone who'd lost everything and was terrified to reach for something new. "Yeah, kiddo," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "I think I do love you. Both of you." Sarah couldn't breathe. The room was too small and too big all at once. Emma clapped her hands, delighted, completely missing the weight of what she'd just made happen. "Then you should live with us," Emma declared. "Or we should live here. That's what families do." James crossed the room, moving slowly, giving Sarah every chance to step back, to shut this down, to remind him of all the reasons this was impossible. But she didn't move. She stood there, heart pounding, and when he was close enough to touch, she looked up at him and saw her own fear reflected back at her. "Is she right?" James asked softly. "Do you smile different when you talk about me?" "Yes," Sarah whispered, because there was no point in lying anymore. "I do." "I don't want to mess this up," James said, his voice rough. "I don't want to be the boss who takes advantage. I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated or like you owe me anything." "I don't feel any of those things," Sarah said. "I feel terrified and hopeful and like maybe this is real." "It's real," James said, and then he kissed her, soft and careful and full of question marks. Sarah pulled back from the kiss, her eyes searching James's face for any sign of regret. She found none, just tenderness and fear, and something that looked a lot like love. Emma was dancing around them, singing a made-up song about families and houses and being together forever, blissfully unaware of how complicated adult emotions could be. "We need to be smart about this," Sarah said, even as her hand stayed on James's chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. "I still work for you. People already talk. If we do this, if we really do this, it's going to get messy." "Let it get messy," James said. "I've spent 3 years trying to control everything, trying to keep everything neat and manageable and safe, and all it did was make me miserable. I don't want safe anymore, Sarah. I want real. I want you and Emma, and whatever messy, complicated, beautiful thing we can build together." They started dating, though the word felt inadequate for what was happening between them. They kept it quiet at first, maintaining professional boundaries at work, but spending every evening and weekend together. James learned to cook simple meals in Sarah's tiny kitchen. Sarah learned to navigate his enormous house without feeling like an imposter. Emma blossomed under the attention of 2 adults who loved her unconditionally. But the past wasn't done with them yet. It came back one Tuesday evening when James was going through old files in his home office, searching for a contract he needed. He found instead a folder he'd forgotten existed, filled with medical records and hospital paperwork from Lily's treatment. And there, paper-clipped to a billing statement, was a photograph he'd never seen before. It was Lily in her hospital bed, eyes closed, peaceful. But she wasn't alone. A young nurse sat beside her, holding her hand, and the angle of the shot captured the nurse's face clearly. Brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, tired eyes full of compassion, a soft smile as she watched the sleeping child. It was Sarah. Unmistakably, undeniably Sarah. James stared at the photo for a long time, his hands shaking. Then he looked at the date stamped in the corner. October 12th, 3 days before Catherine had taken the photo he already had, the one where Sarah's face was hidden. 3 days before Catherine had written about the nurse who sang. Sarah had been there. She'd held his daughter's hand. She'd sat with Lily during those long, terrible nights when James had been too afraid to be there himself. And somehow, impossibly, the universe had brought her back into his life. Not as his daughter's nurse, but as the woman he was falling in love with, as the mother of the child who was teaching him how to live again. He found Catherine's journal again and read through it more carefully this time, searching for every mention of Sarah. There were more than he'd expected. Sarah stayed past her shift again tonight. She said Lily needed someone and her other patients were stable. I don't know what we'd do without her. And later, Lily asked for Sarah today, not for me or for James, but for Sarah, the nurse who sings. I should be jealous, but I'm just grateful someone can bring her comfort when we can't. And then, just days before Lily passed, I told Sarah today that if there are angels, she's one of them. She cried and said she wished she could do more. I told her she's already done everything. She's given my baby girl peace in her final days. What more could any mother ask for? James closed the journal and pressed his fists against his eyes, trying to hold back tears that came anyway. Catherine had known. She'd known how special Sarah was, and now, somehow, Sarah was here, in his life, in his heart, helping him heal in ways he'd never thought possible. He called Sarah that night, his voice urgent. I need to show you something. Can you come over? When Sarah arrived with Emma, James spread the photos and journal pages across his dining room table, like evidence in a case he was trying to solve. You were there more than I realized, he said. Catherine wrote about you. She was grateful for you. She knew how much you meant to Lily. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she read Catherine's words. I didn't know she felt that way. I was just doing my job. Lily was so sweet, so scared, I couldn't leave her alone. You did more than your job, James said fiercely. You gave my daughter comfort when her own father was too much of a coward to face what was happening. You gave my wife peace knowing that Lily wasn't suffering alone. You've been part of my family's story for years, Sarah. I just didn't know it until now. Emma, who'd been playing with her dolls in the corner, came over to look at the photos. She pointed at the picture of Lily. Is that the angel? She asked. The one from your song, Mama? Sarah's breath caught. She'd never explicitly told Emma about Lily, but somehow her daughter had understood. Yes, baby, that's the angel. She's pretty, Emma said simply. I bet she's happy you found each other. Angels like happy endings. Out of the mouths of children came the truth adults were too scared to acknowledge. James pulled both Sarah and Emma into his arms, holding them like he'd never let go. I want to marry you, he said into Sarah's hair. Not because I'm trying to replace what I lost, not because I feel guilty or grateful, but because you and Emma have become my reason for waking up in the morning, because I love you, both of you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it. Sarah pulled back to look at him. You're sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be a family. All the complications, all the gossip, all the judgment from people who think I'm a gold digger or you're having a midlife crisis. Are you ready for that? I've never been more sure of anything, James said. Marry me, Sarah Mitchell. Let me adopt Emma. Let me give you both the life you deserve. Yes, Sarah whispered. Yes to all of it. The wedding was small and unconventional, held not in a church or hotel ballroom, but in the gardens of Children's Memorial Hospital, in a courtyard that James had funded and renovated in Lily's memory. It was a place of healing now, with flowers and benches and a fountain where children could play. It felt right to begin their new life in a place that honored the past, while embracing the future. James's mother flew in from Boston, an elegant woman in her 70s, who'd spent 3 years grieving not just her granddaughter, but her son, who'd become a stranger after his loss. She'd been skeptical when James first told her about Sarah, worried he was making decisions out of desperation rather than love. But when she met Sarah and Emma, When she saw how her son smiled again, how he laughed and played and lived instead of just existing, her doubts vanished. "You brought my boy back," she told Sarah the night before the wedding, tears streaming down her lined face. "I thought I'd lost him forever, but here he is whole again, thank you." The ceremony was short and sweet. Emma was the flower girl, taking her job very seriously as she scattered rose petals down the aisle. James's voice broke when he said his vows, promising to love Sarah and Emma every day for the rest of his life, to be present and engaged and worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Sarah promised to be patient with his grief, to honor Lily's memory, to build a family that had room for both past and present. When the officiant pronounced them married, Emma cheered so loudly that everyone laughed, and James scooped her up as he kissed his new wife. The three of them tangled together in a moment of pure joy. The reception was held in a nearby restaurant. Nothing fancy, just good food, and people who genuinely cared about them. Margaret was there, dabbing at her eyes and admitting she'd been wrong about Charity. "Sometimes," she told Sarah, "the universe gives you exactly what you need and you'd be a fool not to take it." During the toasts, James's mother stood and raised her glass. "To my son, who learned that loving again doesn't mean forgetting. To Sarah, who proved that angels walk among us. And to Emma, who reminded us all that children see the truth we adults try to hide. May your family be blessed with all the happiness you've already brought to each other." Later that night, after the guests had left and Emma was asleep in the car, James and Sarah stood in the hospital garden, looking up at the stars. A small plaque on the fountain read, "In memory of Lily Harrison, who taught us that love never ends, it just transforms." "Do you think she knows?" Sarah asked quietly. "Do you think Lily knows that we found each other?" James pulled her close. "I think she orchestrated the whole thing. My daughter was stubborn like that. Once she decided something, there was no stopping her. And I think she decided that her daddy needed to be happy again." "Then we better not disappoint her," Sarah said, smiling up at him. They went home to James's house, which was no longer empty and cold, but filled with Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, Sarah's books on the shelves, and the sound of a family that had been broken and rebuilt into something new and beautiful. The three of them fell asleep in the master bedroom, Emma between them. And for the first time in years, James didn't dream of loss. He dreamed of tomorrows. Months passed. Sarah continued working as James's assistant, but now their professional relationship was grounded in partnership and mutual respect rather than hierarchy. Emma started kindergarten, thriving in a good school with new friends and opportunities Sarah had once thought impossible. James's mother visited often, embracing her new granddaughter with the fierce love of someone who'd been given an unexpected gift. They established rituals. Every Sunday they visited the hospital garden and left flowers at Lily's memorial. Every night Sarah sang the lullaby to Emma, and sometimes James joined in, his voice rough but sincere. Every month they donated to pediatric cancer research, turning grief into action, loss into legacy. The gossip at TechCore eventually died down as people realized that James and Sarah's relationship was real and lasting. Some employees even approached Sarah to tell her their own stories of loss and second chances, finding inspiration in her willingness to embrace happiness after hardship. One evening, almost a year after the wedding, James came home to find Sarah in the kitchen, crying over a letter. He rushed to her side, terrified something was wrong, but she was smiling through her tears. "It's from Catherine's sister," Sarah explained. "She was going through Catherine's things and found another journal, one from after Lily passed. She wanted me to see an entry." James took the letter and read, "Catherine wrote this 2 weeks before she died. She said, 'I don't know if James will ever heal from this. He's so broken and I'm leaving him too. But I have to believe that somewhere, somehow he'll find his way back to life. Maybe it will be that nurse, Sarah, the one who loved our Lily so much. I saw the way she cared, the way she gave everything. If there's any justice in this world, James will find someone like her. Someone who understands loss but hasn't let it destroy their capacity for love. Tell him if you get the chance that I want him to be happy, that I release him from the prison of grief, that love doesn't end, it just transforms." James and Sarah held each other and cried, mourning and celebrating in equal measure. Catherine had given them her blessing from beyond, had wanted this for James, had seen in Sarah the same qualities that James now cherished every single day. That night, they tucked Emma into bed together, and she asked them to tell her a story. "Tell me about the angel," she requested. "Tell me about Lily." So they did. They told her about a brave little girl who loved butterflies and princess costumes and bedtime stories, who had a smile that lit up every room, who had brought together three people who all needed each other desperately, even though it took years for them to understand it. "She's watching over us," Emma said confidently when the story ended. "That's what angels do." "Yes," James agreed, kissing her forehead. "She is. And so is another angel, your mama's angel, who made sure we all found each other." "Then we're very lucky," Emma said, and yawned. "We have two angels. That's better than most people." After Emma fell asleep, James and Sarah stood in the doorway of her room, watching her chest rise and fall in peaceful rhythm. The house around them was quiet but alive, filled with the energy of a family that had been forged from loss and love in equal measure. "No regrets?" James asked softly. "Not a single one," Sarah replied. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner. But maybe we needed all that pain to appreciate this joy. Maybe that's how it works." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "Or maybe some people just get lucky twice in one lifetime." They walked hand in hand to their own room, past the photos on the walls that showed both past and present, grief and healing, endings and beginnings. In the morning, there would be breakfast to make and meetings to attend, and the ordinary challenges of daily life. But for now, in this moment, they were simply three souls who had found each other against impossible odds and chosen, every single day, to keep choosing love. Dear listeners, we hope Sarah, James, and Emma's story touched your heart. If you were moved by this tale of loss and love, of second chances and healing, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you most. Was it Sarah's courage in accepting help, James's journey from grief to hope, or Emma's innocent wisdom that brought them all together? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that even in our darkest moments, love can find a way. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.